Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lecture on for loops and looping inside of Java. For loops you might have seen inside of Python. For loops have the syntax of for I in list and so forth. And the syntax in Java is going to be kind of similar, but I want to show off what the entirety of it will look like. In your week 2 examples folder, you have a file called try for loops, which is a Java file that puts together a few examples of what a for loop looks like and does. At the start, we just have a few items that are set for us. And right here, we have a while loop that's pretty familiar to us. What this is while our upper value of 1 is less than 1, we are going to go ahead and try to print it out. But you'll notice here that a while loop will run pretty normally. Let's just see if this will work for us. Enter a positive number greater than or equal to one whole number. So I'll put a 5. And then after we go ahead and put a 5, we'll notice that our program goes ahead and it runs a few times there. So I would like everyone to take some time to look through this on your own just to see what's going on. But what I really want to focus on right here is the syntax of a for loop. So a for loop is going to essentially start at a certain value, which is what this I is equal to 1 is. It does not need to start at that value every time. This could be up to you. We could say I is equal to 0. And for our time being right now, I'm going to go ahead and comment out this code right here. We'll notice here that we have, after we have our first initialization variable, we have something in the middle called a loop invariant, or just a check to see where we are in our code. So what this is essentially telling us is if I is less than or equal to upper, continue with the for loop. And then after this one, we have our incrementer. So I++ is essentially saying increase I by 1. So again, if I go ahead and I print out this, and let's just say I want to hit 5 again, you'll notice that when I type in 5 up here, I see for I is equal to 1, I is less than or equal to upper, which is 5 in this area here, I++, I'm going to print out I plus a space, and you'll see here that I start at 1, and then I becomes 2, and then I becomes 3, I becomes 4 and 5. Now, what happens if I do an I plus I is equal to I plus 2? And let me go ahead and put this at 0. And let me try to run this again with hitting 5. You'll notice that essentially what happens is that I have my I set to 0. I check if I is less than or equal to 5 in this scenario. And then I increase I by 2. So we get an I of a 0 value, and then we increase it by 2 to get to 2, and then we increase it to 2 again to get to 4. You can also use multiplication to do this as well. There's a bunch of different things inside of a for loop that we can use. I'll use 6 here, for instance, and it will give us different outputs based on that. Cool. And again, usually our for loops are I++ there, but this is a nice file in the trial for loops number to go ahead and show off what's going on. So now you can see once I set it to 0, we went ahead and we went from 0 up to 10. My multiplication might not have worked because if I try multiplying 0 by 2, it's most likely going to give me an error. So I'm going to go ahead and run this again. And let me try to put this to 10. And you'll notice that when I have my 1 at 1, and I print it out, and then I increase my 1 by times 2, so it becomes 2. And then is 2 less than or equal to 10? It's not. So what do? 2 times 2, which is 4. Is 4 less than or equal to 10? It is not. So then I do 4 times 2. I get an 8. Is 8 less than or equal to 10? It is not. So I get an 8 times 2. And 16 is less than or equal to 10? It isn't. It is greater than 10. So then we don't print it out. Now, a for loop can also be nested, which is essentially a for loop within a for loop. And these for loops are pretty interesting for our purposes here. For example, here we have a for loop that starts at 0, and then it is less than or equal to 3, and then we increase by 1 value. So this would go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. If we took out this less than or equal to and just made it less than, the values that we get is 0, 1, and 2. After we go ahead and do this, we are into this for loop. So the way that this works out is that the for loop of the inside goes ahead and runs a certain amount of times, such as up here. And after it exits out of this area, it is going to run this for loop again for us. So if we run our code here, you'll notice that we get 0, 1, 02, 03, 04, and 05 increasingly. And then we actually restart to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. So you can see this is kind of looking like coordinates of a plane and so forth as well. But these are really, this is a really nice way to show off for loops and a nesting for loops. And again, the syntax of a for loop, let's just say I have my int count is equal to 0. And then what I could say here is, I'll actually ignore the count there. I could say for int of I is equal to 0. I is less than or equal to, let me say max count, because we used max count in our previous ones. And I'll say max count is equal to 10. And then I say I plus plus. I will go ahead and see, okay, let me print out my, I is already declared up there, so let me comment it out really quick. Sorry about that. And then what I'm going to do essentially is system.out.println I. And now I, even though we started at 0, we could see here if I run my code, I get 0 all the ways up to 10. So now I have my 0 up to 10. As a little trick here, if you don't want to have it on individual lines, you can do a print statement where you don't have a print line, and you could just print a little space after it as well. You'll get familiar with tricks like printing in, as you code more. But you can see here now I go from 0 up to 10. If I change my max count up to 20, I now get my 0 up to 20. So again, these are all, this is essentially the format of a for loop. And what I really want to nail home for everyone is that you go ahead and declare a variable, set it equal to 0 or 1 or whichever you want your starting point to be. This is your loop invariant, or something that will check what is true or not in your code. We have it called as the test statement inside of our notes. So essentially, you need to make sure that this is true in order to execute the body of your for loop. And if this is true and the body gets executed, then you increase your value. Now, again, this is pretty much identical to, let's just go ahead and say I create a variable called a, and I set it equal to 0. And I say while a is less than max count, I can do my print of a like so, and then I can increase a, and then I can, oops a daisy, let me do it this way, and try to run my code this way. And we'll notice, let me put a break statement in between here, or a print line here, so that it's not on the same line. You'll notice it's exact same. So you'll see that these two types of loops are essentially identical, and you'll notice in 300 and the later courses that you're going to be kind of tasked with changing between the two types of loops. But again, just remember that they're pretty much the same thing, right? You have your assignment operative where you want to start, you have your loop invariant or your testing loop to make sure you need to run it still, and then you increase the value. Awesome. So after we go ahead and we talked a bit about a for loop, you might be wondering, okay, well, what are these really useful for, or where are we going to be using them a lot? And of course, very similar to lists in Python, we use them quite a bit with arrays. So per our notes, an array is a collection of variables or objects that is going to be given a single name, and it has numerical indexes. And what that means is that whenever we start off with an array, we're going to be starting at index 0 and then continuing up to 1 less than the length of the array. Now, this seems like a lot at once, so what I want to do is go ahead and create a new Java file. And I'm just going to call this file array practice. I'm going to create this as a main. And I want to talk a bit about the syntax of an array creation. So to go ahead and actually get started with making an array, the syntax that we reference is the type of the array. And again, there's a few things I want to discuss that is a bit different in Java than in Python when it comes to arrays here. First of all, let's go ahead and try to initialize one. Let's just say that I want an array of integers holding numbers, maybe the course numbers at the pol. And what I do now is I say int, and then I put in 2 brackets, and then I declare an array name. So let's just see course numbers. And now you'll notice that when I hover over this, This is actually a variable in Python, or excuse me, in Java, and it is an array value. Now, what I would like to do after I declare a variable name for my array is to actually determine the size of the array. So let's just say I'm working with 3 different courses. So what I need to do is I need to reference my variable name, course numbers, and I say new int. And inside of this value here, inside these parentheses, I'm going to give it the size of the array. So I'll put it 5. And you'll notice I actually now have these course values set up. So now let's just say that I want to go ahead and let's try to use the logic of a for loop and try to see if we can get a bit creative with what we want it to do. What I want to say is create course numbers between let's just say it's graduate level. So let's do 400 to 405. Let's just say it's 5 different graduate level courses. So if I want to go ahead and I want to fill in this array with 5 different course values, I'm going to use a for loop to do it for me. And what I could say is for int of, let's just say I for our current index, or excuse me, our current element. Let's call it num. And I'm going to set it to 400 to go ahead and start out. And then I want to make sure that num is less than or equal to 405 because that's where I want it to end. And what I'm going to do is just simply increment num up by 1. And what I'm going to do here now is go ahead and try to fill in the array with these certain values here. So just to go ahead and make sure that this is working for us, I'm going to go ahead and print out num. And let's just see if we get the 400 to 405. Excellent. So we have this for loop that goes ahead and it prints out everything from 400 to 405. And before we actually delve into the arrays, because a few of us might be a bit new to it coming from lists and stuff in Python, I want to talk a bit about the layout of the array as well. So immediately here, you'll notice that there's a lot more work that goes into creating an array in Java in comparison to a list in Python. And the main difference is that arrays in Java are immutable and a typeset. So lists in Python are mutable, which means you can add and take away stuff from them as you'd like. And they're also not specific to a type, which means that you can have integers, strings, and floats in the same list. In Java, that doesn't fly. In Java, we want to make sure that we have a very specific sized array. So our array can only be a size of 5 because we said it was 5. What would the size of my array be if it was here as 10? The size would be 10. And that means that I can only have 5 elements inside of it. And what are the types of the elements? Well, it is going to be a type of int, and they can only be an int. I can't mix and match types. So Java arrays are a lot more specific, and because of that, it's actually a different way we can access them as well. So let's just say that I have an array of 5, and let's just say that this is my array here of 5 different elements that I'm working with. Let's just say I have E1, E2, E3 for each element, E4, E5. These are my 5 different ints that I'm working with. How come in the notes it says something like it is from 0 up to 1 less than length? In the notes we say the index values of an array are from 0 up to size minus 1. And the reason that this is the case here, which is this one, the reason that we are going from 0 up to array length is because, again, we start counting at 0. So this is my 0th index. This is my first index. This is my second index. This is the third one. And this is the fourth one. And you might think, okay, this is kind of curious, right? My last index is 4. And how do I get to 4? Well, my size is 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. And again, our index values start at 0 and they always go up by 1 there. So there's not really a big trick going on here. It's essentially because we start counting at 0 for our index, we need to do 1 less than length. Now, we went ahead and we made a little for loop up here that was able to determine my for loops from 400 up to 405. And it's a neat little trick, but if we notice here, what if I want to try and access what my values inside of my array right now, of course, numbers are? The way that I can access the specific indexes in an array is to go ahead and type out that array name and then access this index like so. So the way that we do that is by array name followed by an open bracket and then a 0 and then a close bracket. And what this is saying is go ahead and print out the value that is at index 0 of my array course numbers. So of course we'll see here, and let me go ahead and make this a bit neater. At the top is the stat one. Do another print line. We'll see here that I start at 0, and then we can see that if I change this up to 1, I still have my zeros. So not the best right now. Let me try to go ahead and print out each of my arrays. And again, I want to show off a little error you might encounter when you're coding, because I had this issue a lot as well. What do folks think might happen if I go ahead and I try to access index 5? Well, I'm only have values from 0 to 4, so what could happen, I get the index 5 out of bounds for length 5. So again, if you have an array of length 5, you can never ever access the index of 5, and never fall for a trick or anything. If anyone tells you you can, they're lying to you. Make sure that you always are one less than the length of the array. Now, let's just say that I don't know the length of the array and I'm working with one given to me. How do I access that length? Well, there's a command in Java.length that will go ahead and give you back the specific number. And you can see here I get a 5. So that will tell us the length of the array. Continuing with this idea here, what I would like to do is go ahead and actually now try to fill in these numbers up here into my for loop. And we'll notice that our for loop right up here, it's good. It goes ahead and creates our course numbers, but they're not inside of my array yet. So how do I actually go ahead and do that? Well, what I could do is go ahead and try to access every single index of the array. And you'll notice here that I have 5 different print statements that do it. And you might be wondering, well, how do I get these? Do I always have to print out each thing like this? No, a really neat trick we could do here is go ahead and start an I at index 0. And the reason we're starting it at 0 is because our array starts at 0 for our index. And then I could say I is less than course numbers dot length. And course numbers dot length is the value of 5 that we saw earlier. And I want to make sure I access every single value of this I so that I can fill them in. And you'll notice here, what might happen if I do less than or equals to? Well, course numbers dot length is 5. And if I do less than or equals to, I'm going to have a 5 value. So that's not going to be good. So I'm going to go to less than. And what I can actually do here is go ahead and say print out course numbers of I. And what this means is that I is going to become 0, and then 1, and then 2. And this snippet of code is functionally identical to this one right here. This for loop does the exact same thing that this is doing here. So if I run this, I get the exact same zeros, but you'll notice I'm not printing out anything besides this for loop here. So it's still just a bunch of zeros, so that's kind of boring. So why don't we try to combine this logic with this logic up here with one more for loop. And the way that we can do that now is to go ahead and create another for loop. I'm going to try out int of I is equal to 0. And you'll notice that, oops, I'm going to make this an A there. Usually it's good practice. You can always do the int of I there for our purposes here. But let's just say my int of A is equal to 0. And what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a course number. And I'm going to set it as an integer to 400. And then I have my for int of A is equal to 0. And then my A is less than course numbers dot length, because what I want my A to be right now is the index of these values. And then I'm going to do an A++. What I can do now to set these values here is I could say, go ahead and grab the index of A at course numbers and set that element equal to course number. And of course, course number is going to be 400 a few times. So let's go ahead and try to run this. You'll notice now that I have a 400 pop up for each one. But that's kind of boring, right? I don't want 5 of the same courses. So I'm going to go ahead and say course number plus equals 1, which is this one up here. And now I get my 400, 41, 402, 403, and 404. Awesome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, of course, I didn't get up to the 405. Apologies for that because I didn't have enough space there. So if I want to, what I could do here is go ahead and make this a length of 6. And now I have my 400 to 405 there as well. So cool. So this is a very brief introduction to for loops in Java and using arrays to create them. And there is a few inside of your examples. Simple array.java has more items that you can mess around with and fiddle around and make some content there.